Hello, friends. This is the Netarts Friends Church podcast. We are Jesus people, Kingdom of God people, welcoming, yearning, sharing. And we're glad you're connecting here with us. We'd love to connect in person as well. If you're inclined to support this podcast or for more information, just hop on over to netartsfriends.org. That's netartsfriends.org. Let's jump into today's sermon. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, verse 27 through 36. The Sermon on the Plain. Jesus said, "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Speak well of those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." What is one of your earliest memories of selling something? Did you ever have a lemonade stand as a kid, or sell Girl Scout cookies, or maybe like me, you sold chocolate for your sports team, or maybe it was books or newspapers or milk bottles, popcorn, fruit. For some people, their earliest memory of selling something involves a form of barter or trade with a sibling or with some kids at school. Like, I can remember going through my basketball card collection and trying to convince my brother to trade me his Michael Jordan card for my John Stockton and Karl Malone. Or I can remember my mom giving us all Saturday chores and then trying to convince my youngest sister to trade me chores, and her saying that she'd only do it if I gave her cheese. She loved cheese. So, we had a discussion time at our Sunday gathering. So if you're listening along with someone, chat with them about this. Otherwise, just kind of think back. What are some of your earliest memories of selling, bartering, or trading something? So take a few minutes with that. We live in a world where transactions are like the bedrock of social functioning. They make the world go around. I'll give you one thing in exchange for another. And most of us learn the art of the transaction at a very early age. Transactions are how you get most of the food you eat and the clothes you wear and the roof over your head. We live immersed in a world of transactions. And it's no surprise that transactional thinking gets inside of our motivations, our behavior. It's no surprise that transactional dynamics get inside of our relationships. It's I'll scratch your back and you scratch mine. I do for you, you do for me, give and take. And there are hundreds of varieties of mutually beneficial relationships, which are transactional relationships. So friends take turns complimenting one another. I make you feel good about you and you make me feel good about me. Or one spouse cooks the meal and the other one's on the hook to do the dishes. Or an elderly person and a young person have an understanding. You're going to take care of me in old age and I'm going to leave you some of my inheritance money. Or a friend pays for your coffee and you say, thanks, I'll get yours next time. Or ride sharing with another family, like I'll pick the kids up from sports practice this week and then you're on the hook next week. Or project sharing in the same way. I'll help you put in your garden and then you help me put in a new alternator on my car. Or parents who say, yeah, you can have the night off from the kids and go hang out with your girlfriends this weekend. Next week, I've got a fishing trip with the guys that I want to take. Spouses, partners, lovers who operate out of a I'll please you and you please me. A coworker who agrees to cover for you while you visit your parents and then you cover for them on their upcoming vacation. Just because a fish can't see the water that it's swimming in, it doesn't mean that the water doesn't affect the fish. The water that we swim in gets inside of us, and we swim in transactional water. I'm not sure we realize all the ways that the water of transactions gets inside of us and affects our thinking and our motivations, behaviors, relationships. And it's not an all or nothing question. It's not like, well, is that relationship completely transactional or not? I'm not sure that's the way it works. It's more a question of in what way or to what degree has any particular relationship become transactional? When is my thinking, my motivations, my behavior transactional? Am I even aware of it? So, let me offer some questions that help you explore this and maybe see the transactional nature of life, thinking, motivations, behavior, relationships a little more. So, here's a question. Evaluating fairness. When was the last time you found yourself evaluating the fairness of a relationship? Like, how come I spend hours listening to you gripe about how frustrating your job is, and I'm a good listener? I don't correct you, I'm supportive. But then if I start venting and processing about a tough parenting situation, instead of being supportive, you interrupt me or you spout some advice or you make me feel small, and that doesn't feel fair. Something like that. When was the last time that something about a relationship didn't feel fair to you? Another question, giving while expecting. So we live in a world that gives and lends based on future prospects. So when was the last time you did something generous, but you thought about the future and you thought about the response that you were going to receive the whole time? Kind of, what am I going to get out of this? How is this person going to respond? Unmet expectations. When was the last time that someone didn't give you what you were expecting out of a relationship, and how did that impact you? That can point towards some transactional thinking. Feelings of obligation. When was the last time you dealt with feelings of obligation? Like, man, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to go, but I have to keep up my end of the deal, my end of the bargain. I should. That can point towards some transactional dynamics. Keeping tabs. Does your mind keep tabs of what has been given and received? Does your heart know who owes you and who you owe? Like, if you had to make a list of the financial, emotional, physical favors, services, goods, resources that have been exchanged between you and someone else, could you do it? Is that information readily accessible in your memory? That's keeping tabs. Not being okay with the balance of giving and receiving. Do you only stay in relationships that are mutually beneficial, where everyone gets something that they want? Can you remember the last time that you pulled away from a relationship because ultimately you weren't okay with the balance between what you were giving and what you were getting out of the relationship? And so you're kind of like, yeah, I didn't sign up for this. Reactions. When you react or overreact, what's behind it? Behind many of our reactions, there can be a failed transaction. So sometimes it helps just to say, well, what's behind this? Was there a failed transaction? It helps you notice. Penalties and rewards. Do your relationships have penalties and rewards? Like, well, if this person gives me what I expect, or if they perform well, do I treat them differently than if they don't perform well, or they don't give me what I expected? Feelings of discomfort in receiving. Have you ever had someone do something generous? They do a favor or they pay for something for you, and it makes you feel uncomfortable because now you owe them one. Uh, a lot of society is built around some unwritten rules of reciprocity and exchange and transaction that makes you feel this way. Like, now they paid for me. Now I'm going to have to do something for them. So your answers to all of these questions may point towards some of the ways that the transactional water that you swim in has gotten inside of you. And once you start to become aware of this transactional water, it can feel kind of daunting. It can feel impossible to get rid of the transactional nature of human life. Now, someone might say, well, wait a minute, I don't get it. What's the problem? Like, what's wrong with a favor for a favor? What's wrong with mutually beneficial relationships and arrangements? Like, is there something intrinsically wrong with transactions? And the response, I'll put it as a question, and I think this is the question at the bottom of it all. What is love? Is love simply a favor for a favor? What happens to human flourishing when all love is distorted into a transactional exchange? What happens to love when relationships are reduced to each person tallying up what's been given and received and then doling out some kind of a response, some kind of a punishment or a reward? When affection, appreciation, or care are only given in exchange for something, how can people not wonder, well, do I actually matter? And how can this not undermine any sense of genuine emotional connection? This is transactional love. Or when relationships are measured by what's given and received, how can people not feel that their value and worth is in what they do rather than who they are? I'm kind of being treated like a human doing here, not a human being. Trust is eroded in transactional love because when everything is a transaction, if everything is a favor for a favor, how do you know if any behavior is truly authentic, genuine, coming from a place of true care, generosity, love? And transactional love is it's always at some level conditional love, which means everything could go away. Everything that you have could just go away. And at the ugliest end of transactional relationships is vengeance. All vengeance is birthed out of a place of punishment and reward, keeping tabs, making people pay for what you think they owe you. Vengeance is always an exchange. So transactional love, it distorts people's view of God too. Instead of living because God already loves them, they live out of fear that they haven't done enough, or they already went too far, they did too much wrong. and so God doesn't love them. There's actually a body of research, psychology and neurology, around what happens when love is treated as transactional. And to sum up those findings, when love is treated as transactional, when it becomes transactional, people struggle with feelings of inadequacy and insecurity. They experience lower satisfaction and stability in their relationships. They experience cycles of anxiety and stress, like, did I meet that person's expectations? Did they meet my expectations? They experience a lot of emotional tension, higher levels of anxiety and fear. It turns out that transactional love, it's an illusion. Transactional love is a bankrupt strategy for human flourishing. Transactions are antithetical to what love is. And so this brings us back to the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. We read them already once, but I want to read them again. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Speak well of those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you. If anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Notice that Jesus characterizes the entire world as reacting. Nobody's acting, they're only reacting. The entire world is spinning in a transactional direction. It's just one long series of exchanges that reduce human relationships and love to a series of punishments and rewards. Everything is a reaction. And Jesus points out how bankrupt a concept of love that is. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. Jesus speaks about God as the one who acts instead of reacting. Instead of a God who is harsh and hard and sharp and bitter, Jesus uses language that is the exact opposite of that language. Jesus says the Most High is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. The image that comes to mind for me here, it's a world that was spinning faster and faster in cycles of transaction and reaction, and love was becoming more and more distorted, and no one really knew that anything else was possible or how to get things turning in a different direction. And so Jesus, God in the flesh, entered into human history and began teaching and living a new way, a way that orients everything to spin in the opposite direction. Love, forgiveness, good news, generosity, giving without expectation. Rather than declaring a favor for a favor, Jesus opened his ministry, this is Luke chapter 4, declaring the favor of God without vengeance. He omitted vengeance. And Jesus' message was so radical that the power brokers of his day murdered him on a cross. They tried to stamp his message out. But Jesus descended into death. He descended to the very center of that world of transaction and reaction. He descended to the depths, into death, to the dead, into hell itself, and spoke this message of love, forgiveness, good news, the favor of God into the depths of hell. And I imagine the entire spinning world coming to a shuddering halt as Jesus opened this world to a new possibility. Transaction and reaction don't have to be the bedrock of all social functioning. They don't have to be the fabric of all relationships. Jesus spoke a new word. It is possible for the world to spin towards love and forgiveness and mercy and good news for all. Brian Zahn says it this way. He says, at the cross of Christ, we discover the axis of divine love that refounds a fallen world. It's that picture of the world spinning the other direction. The love that Jesus declares and invites us into is not reactive love. It is not transactional love. It is unconditional love. It is love that is kind and gives and is generous even when we fail to recognize or appreciate the gift, even when we're running the other direction, even when we are acting in dysfunction and destructive ways. It's love that gives while expecting nothing. That's an interesting question to pause on. This idea of giving while expecting nothing. Have you ever stopped to think about what Jesus expects from you? Not what Jesus wants from you or for you, not what Jesus hopes for you. Have you ever stopped to think about what Jesus expects from you? Brennan Manning tells the story of Jesus coming to him one night and saying, "Little brother, I witnessed a Peter who claimed that he didn't know me, a James who wanted power in return for service to the kingdom, a Philip who failed to see the Father in me, and scores of disciples who were convinced that I was finished on Calvary. The New Testament has many examples of men and women who started out well and then faltered along the way. Yet on Easter night I appeared to Peter. James is not remembered for his ambition, but for the sacrifice of his life for me. Philip did see the Father in me when I pointed the way, and the disciples who despaired had enough courage to recognize me when we broke bread at the end of the road to Emmaus. My point, little brother, is this. I expect more failure from you than you expect from yourself." What if Jesus says that to you? I expect more failure from you than you expect from yourself. What Jesus is saying about giving away your coat, it's much larger than your coat closet. It's much larger than your bank account. It includes both of those, but it runs deeper. It runs to the deepest parts of your heart, and it runs to your history. It runs to the list of people who have failed transactions with you, and you have failed transactions with them. It runs to your relationships today. Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He's kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Distinguished New Testament scholar Fred Craddock writes this. He says, it is not an overstatement to say that Luke 6:35, that's this verse, expresses the essence of the whole gospel. Jesus wants to rescue you from a love that's reduced to transactions, and He's doing that by offering you a new way of life. Jesus wants a life for you that doesn't keep tabs on who owes you what, it just gives. And He wants a life where you no longer think about what can be expected in return. You just give for the joy of giving. And Jesus wants you to have a life where you no longer pull away from people who mess up the balance of giving and receiving. You just keep on giving because you're being you, who you are called to be and who you are in God. Jesus wants you to have a life that doesn't react, it simply acts. And Jesus knows that the path to learning this new way of life is to turn towards the people who you have a history of failed transactions with them, and just to love them, to do good to them, to give to them without expecting anything in return. So it's found in real concrete steps lived out over and over and over. Things like anonymously mailing a special possession to a difficult person in your life, or stepping away from an argument and instead of gathering your mental ammunition for round 2, walking down to the coffee shop and buying them a muffin and a coffee, or calling in an order of flowers for the girl at work who you just overheard gossiping about you, or asking the Holy Spirit to help catch you in the act of hyper-focusing on fairness or unmet expectations or what's in it for you, and instead intentionally finding something beneficial that you can do for that person as soon as possible. Jesus wants to give you the very best love possible, and He wants you to experience giving and receiving the very best love possible. So, a discussion question that we chatted about on Sunday, and for you, you can chat with someone if you're listening, or simply reflect on this. What part of this is the most difficult and daunting, challenging for you? And what part of this feels the most hopeful? Thank you for joining us for a Sunday sermon from Netart's Friends Church. We hope you'll join us soon for one of our in-person worship gatherings. For more information, hop on over to netartsfriends.org. God's peace be with you, friends.